I won't touch you until you beg me, the Alpha King whispered, his mouth close enough that my shackles rattled with every shaky breath I took. Torches spat along the stone walls, throwing his shadow huge and inhuman across the throne behind him. I had been dragged from my village in the dead of night, mud on my bare feet, a rough rope biting into my wrists while his warriors called me Omega, like a sentence, not a gift. I didn't scream when I saw him for the first time. Broad shoulders wrapped in leather and steel, dark hair braided back from a face carved in cold lines, a silver crown resting like a warning above eyes that glowed faintly gold. I told myself he was just another beast in a crown, another monster who would take what he wanted and leave me broken. I didn't scream when he ordered the chains cut and circled me like a predator, every step measured, every breath a test. I only started to shake when he leaned in, armor brushing my chest, and promised he would not lay a finger on me until I asked him to. Monsters take. Only a truly dangerous man makes you afraid you might actually beg. They came for me on a full moon night, when the village should have been safe. The elders had gathered us in the square, their faces pale in the silver light as the bell tolled once, twice, 3 times, a summons no one living had ever heard. Mothers clutched their children closer. Men who spent their days swinging axes suddenly found very important reasons to stare at the ground. The air felt wrong, too sharp in my lungs, as if the moon had teeth. "The king's riders," someone whispered, and the words moved through the crowd like a gust of winter wind. I saw the horses first, black as spilled ink, iron shoes ringing on the stones. Then the banners. A silver wolf's head on a field of midnight blue, snapping in the wind as if the beast could smell blood from miles away. Warriors in leather and steel fanned out around the square, their eyes glowing faintly gold in the dark, their movements too smooth to be entirely human. At their center sat the man who had signed our lives with his name. Not the king, not yet. This was only his voice, the high captain, cloaked in the same colors as the banner. He dismounted with predatory grace and removed his helmet, revealing iron gray hair and a face lined by more battles than seasons I'd seen. He studied us, nostrils flaring as if scent alone could strip us bare. "By decree of His Majesty, Michael, Alpha King of the Northern Reach," he called, voice carrying to the edges of the square. "The moon has chosen, and Omega has come of age in this village. She will be offered to the crown, to seal the peace you all enjoy. Step forward, child, and be named." No one moved. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Omega. The word hummed in the air, heavy with stories girls who never came back, boys whose eyes went gold and never turned human again. Gifts, the priests called them. Sacrifices, everyone else did, but only behind closed doors. I told myself it couldn't be me. I was just Lucy, the baker's daughter, with flour in my hair and calluses on my palms. My wolf had always been a quiet thing, a distant ache in my bones when the moon was full, nothing like the roaring hunger the old tales described. The captain took a slow breath, and his gaze snapped to me like a blade finding a gap in armor. "You," he said. The crowd parted without touching me, as if afraid whatever I carried could leap from my skin to theirs. I tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go. The villagers who had known me my whole life refused to meet my eyes. My father's hand trembled around my wrist, then fell away entirely. I am no Omega," I managed, my voice sounding thin in the stillness. The captain walked toward me, that strange glow brightening in his gaze. When he stopped an arm's length away, his presence pressed against me like a storm wind. "Your scent says otherwise." There was no cruelty in his tone, which somehow made it worse. "Do not shame your family with denial. The king does not choose wrongly." I felt the truth of it then, like a door opening inside my chest. The moonlight seemed to sink into my skin, making every sound too sharp, every heartbeat around me painfully loud. My knees wobbled, and I hated that he saw it. By the time they tied my wrists, my father had not spoken a single word. The journey to the citadel began before dawn. They sat me on a spare horse, my hands bound to the pommel with leather that smelled of oil and sweat. The captain rode ahead, the others flanking me like I might run. I thought about it. I even tested the leather, but every time the thought of escape took shape, I pictured the wolf banners turning back toward the village instead. I wasn't brave enough to risk them for my freedom. We rode through the forest first, where trees grew so close together the branches knitted overhead, turning morning into a dim green twilight. Mist clung to the roots, coiling around the horse's legs like ghostly fingers. Birds fell silent as the riders passed. For the first time, I understood that the stories of the king's warriors were not exaggerations. They moved like part of the wild, not invaders in it. As the sun climbed, the land rose with it, hills swelling under the horses' hooves. The trees thinned, giving way to jagged rocks and wind-scrubbed grass. Ahead, the mountain citadel lifted from the earth like a fist, its walls carved directly from the cliff face. Towers speared the sky, banners snapping from their crowns. It looked less like a castle and more like a beast, hunched on the spine of the world, watching. My village, with its crooked chimneys and muddy lanes, shrank in my memory until it felt like something from a child's drawing, small, fragile, breakable. As we crossed the last ridge, I tasted snow on the wind, even though the path below us was clear. The air was thinner up here, sharper, as if every breath had to earn its place. Wolves howled somewhere beyond the walls, their voices weaving through each other in a chorus that made the hair on my arms rise. One of the riders tilted his head to listen, and something inside me strained toward the sound before I forced it down. By the time we passed through the gate, a massive maw of iron teeth that rattled as it opened, my fingers were numb from cold and fear. They did not drag me this time. The captain cut my wrists free and nodded toward the inner courtyard. "Walk," he said quietly, "with your head high. They smell fear." I wanted to spit that they smelled blood just as well, but I kept my teeth closed around the words. Pride was all I had left. I wrapped it around myself like a cloak and stepped forward. The throne room was worse than the stories. It was carved into the mountain, the ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Torches lined the walls, flames reflecting off banners and polished stone until the room glowed like the inside of a dragon's maw. Wolves, real ones this time, lay sprawled on the steps leading up to the throne, their eyes opening and closing lazily as if this were all a very dull play. And on the throne, watching me cross the cold floor, sat the Alpha King. Michael did not wear a crown in the way the Southern kings did, heavy with jewels. His was a simple band of silver hammered into the shape of a wolf's head that rested above his brow, catching firelight in its teeth. He was larger than I'd imagined any man could be, his shoulders straining the leather and steel that armored his chest, his arms bare and corded with muscles scarred from battles I didn't dare picture. Dark hair fell down his back in braids threaded with tiny rings, each one stamped with a symbol I didn't know. His eyes were the worst, a deep, unsettling amber that seemed to see through flesh, through bone, down into whatever made me me. "Your Majesty," the captain said, dropping to one knee. "The Omega has been found." Those molten eyes left my face only long enough to flick toward him. "Rise, Rowan," the king said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried easily in the vast chamber. Alpha Command lived in it, a weight that brushed against my skin and made my wolf, a timid, unfamiliar thing, rear its head in fearful recognition. Michael's gaze came back to me, and the world narrowed. "What is your name?" he asked. I swallowed. "Lucy," I said, wishing my voice didn't shake on the second syllable. "Of Hollowford." A murmur slid through the gathered nobles. Hollowford was not important enough to be known, and yet my name echoed up the stone as if the mountain itself were trying it on. "Lucy of Hollowford." The king tasted each word like it might bite him. "The moon marks you, Omega. My seers confirm the bond. Do you deny it?" I didn't know how to deny something I had felt in my bones since the square, the way the night had tilted, the way your life could change with a single breath. Still, some stubborn part of me lifted my chin. "I did not ask for it," I said. One of the nobles gasped. Rowan's jaw clenched. The wolves on the steps shifted, claws scraping stone. For a heartbeat, I thought the king would roar, would rise and stalk down the steps to show me exactly what it meant to defy an alpha in his own hall. Instead, his mouth curved the slightest fraction, not a smile, not quite. "Nor did I," he said quietly. The words hit harder than anger would have. I didn't know what to do with a king who admitted he hadn't chosen this either. He lifted a hand. "By decree of the crown and the will of the moon, the bond is acknowledged," he said. "Lucy of Hollowford, you stand under my protection and my claim." The court murmured again, some in approval, some in thinly veiled resentment. I felt their gazes like fingers on the back of my neck. Protection sounded a lot like ownership, but here those two things might be the same. Rowan's hand settled lightly on my shoulder, guiding rather than forcing me to turn. "Come," he murmured. "The king desires a private word." My legs carried me out of the throne room and down a narrower corridor, past guards who watched us but did not speak. We stopped before a heavy wooden door banded in iron. Rowan knocked once, then opened it and gestured me inside. The room was smaller than I expected, lit by a fire and a single candle on a table scattered with maps. A bed stood against one wall, massive and draped in furs. Balconies looked out over the endless drop of the mountainside. Michael stood by the hearth, his armor half unbuckled, the flames painting his skin in copper and gold. Rowan bowed and withdrew, the door shutting with a soft, final click. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear my own breathing and the slow crackle of burning wood. The absence of an audience made everything feel more dangerous, not less. "Come closer," he said at last. Every instinct screamed at me to stay where I was, but my feet moved anyway. The air between us felt thick, charged. When I was an arm's length away, he reached for my bound wrists. I flinched despite myself, shame burning my cheeks. His hands were warm and careful as he turned my wrists palm up, examining the raw skin. Without a word, he pulled a knife from his belt. The blade flashed, and the rope fell away. I expected to step back the moment I was free. Instead, I stood there, wrists tingling, while he studied me with that same unhurried focus, as if I were a puzzle he had all the time in the world to solve. "You are afraid," he said. It wasn't a question. I still answered. "You are the Alpha King," I whispered. "Is anyone not afraid of you?" Something like amusement flickered in his eyes, quickly buried. "Many pretend they are not." His gaze dropped briefly to my hands, then rose to my face again. "You smell of fear and fury. The fear I understand. The fury, not everyone would still have that, after being dragged from their home in chains. Perhaps you do not know everyone as well as you think," I said, before my better judgment could throttle the words. His mouth twitched. "Perhaps." He took a slow breath, as if choosing his next words with care. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than in the throne room, the edges less sharp, but the command in it had not dulled. "Hear me, Lucy of Hollowford. The bond is real, and it will pull at us whether we want it or not. I will not pretend otherwise." His eyes caught the firelight, turning almost molten. "But I will give you this, though no law requires it." He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze, close enough that the scent of leather, steel, and something wild curled around me. "I will not force your body," he said. "Not now, not ever." I stared at him, caught between disbelief and something I refused to name. "You expect me to believe that?" Quote, a corner of his mouth lifted, but his eyes were very serious. "Believe what you wish. The vow stands regardless." His next words dropped in pitch, rougher, brushing along my skin like a physical thing. "I won't touch you until you beg me." Heat rushed to my face so fast it made me dizzy. I hated that he could probably smell it. "I will never beg you," I managed, each word bitten off like it hurt. For the first time, a real smile ghosted over his lips, there and gone like a passing shadow. It wasn't cruel. That frightened me more. "We will see," he murmured. He stepped back then, giving me space, as if he hadn't just set my entire future on a path I hadn't chosen. The bond hummed between us, restless, unsatisfied. I wrapped my arms around myself, as if I could hold my pieces together by sheer stubbornness. I would never beg him. I repeated it like a prayer, like a spell, like armor. Even if it killed me, they did not take me to a dungeon. Rowan led me up a spiral of stone steps that seemed to climb forever, his torch painting the walls in restless orange. My legs shook by the time we reached the landing, more from everything that had happened than from the climb. He opened a door and stepped aside, and for a moment I thought I had walked into someone else's life. The chamber was huge, larger than my entire cottage at home. A fire crackled in the hearth, heat licking at the chill that lived in the mountain's bones. Rich furs spilled across the floor, soft and silver, and carved chests lined the walls, their lids inlaid with moonstone and pale wood. A bed big enough to swallow 3 people sat beneath a canopy of dark fabric, its blankets thick and inviting. It should have felt like luxury. All I could think was that cages came in many forms, and this one had velvet bars. "This tower adjoins His Majesty's rooms," Rowan said. "If you need anything, the bell rope is there." He pointed to a braided cord near the bed. "Guards stand outside the door at all hours. For your protection," he added, but we both heard the rest. "To keep you in." He left before I could decide whether to hate him. The door closed with a quiet finality that sounded louder than any slam. I crossed to the balcony because it was the only thing that looked like escape. Cold air rushed over my face as I pushed open the shutters. Below, the world dropped away into a dark sea of treetops, the forest stretching to the horizon like a living thing. The village lights, if they were still burning, were too far to see. The wind tasted of snow and pine and something older, something that hummed against my teeth. No climbing down then, unless I suddenly learned to fly. By morning, they sent the women. They arrived in a flurry of silk and perfume, 3 of them, each more polished than the last. The eldest introduced herself as Lady Heir, lips curving in a smile that never touched her eyes. The younger 2 didn't bother with names. They moved around me like well-trained birds, chirping little comments as they took stock of my plain dress and wind-tangled hair. "We will need to burn that," one murmured, fingering my sleeve. "Wash first," the other said. "The King's Omega cannot smell of smoke and bread." The King's Omega. As if those words were an outfit they could lace me into. They bathed me in steaming water scented with herbs I didn't recognize, scrubbing until my skin tingled. Then came the layers. Soft linen, dark blue wool, a bodice that stole half my breath and made my reflection in the polished metal seem like a stranger. They braided my hair with silver thread, fingers quick and impersonal, turning me into something I was not and had never asked to be. As they worked, Lady Mara spoke of etiquette, how low to bow, when to speak, and when to keep silent, which noble houses liked flattery and which preferred fear. Her voice was smooth as cream, her words sharp as a knife's edge. "You must not look away when His Majesty addresses you," she said, pinning a simple pendant at my throat. "It will be taken as disrespect, but do not meet his gaze too boldly before the court. That will be taken as presumption." "So I must look and not look," I said, "be seen and invisible at the same time." Her smile widened, thin and satisfied. "You learn quickly." I didn't tell her I had been practicing that trick my whole life. When they left, the room felt even emptier than before. Every surface gleamed. Even I gleamed, like some polished offering on an altar. Day bled into evening. Servants came and went with food, with more clothes, with quiet instructions. No one stayed long. No one called me Lucy. Night fell heavy over the mountains. The fire burned low, shadows stretching long fingers across the floor. I lay on the enormous bed, staring at the rafters, the blankets too warm and too soft. Sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts kept circling the same point. The throne room. His eyes. The way his vow had wrapped around my throat. I turned onto my side, pressing my palms over my ears. That was when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, measured, pacing. Not in the corridor through the wall. The bond tugged, sudden and sharp, like someone had hooked a chain under my ribs and given it a testing pull. My breath caught. On the other side of the stone, Michael walked back and forth, every turn marked by a faint scrape of boot on rock. I could picture him without wanting to. Broad shoulders taut, hands clasped behind his back, jaw clenched. I told myself I was imagining the way his restlessness echoed my own. I told myself the warmth that flared in my chest was anger, nothing else. The footsteps stopped. Silence settled, thick and watchful. "Sleep, Omega," his voice came, low through the stone. Not loud enough for anyone else to hear, but the bond carried it to me as clearly as if he stood beside the bed. "No one will harm you here." I bit back the urge to answer. To tell him that the problem wasn't the enemies outside these walls. It was the man who owned them. The next evening, they led me to him for our first shared meal. The dining chamber was smaller than the hall, but still grander than anything I'd known. Long table, candlelight flickering off silver dishes, windows opening onto a sky bruised with sunset. Only one place was set at the head. Another waited at his right hand. Michael rose when I entered. The gesture startled me almost as much as the sight of him without the full weight of his armor. He still wore leather and steel, but the chest piece was gone, replaced by a dark tunic that fit too well over muscle, sleeves rolled to expose forearms corded and scarred. His crown was absent. His authority was not. "Omega," he said with a nod. "Lucy," I corrected before I could stop myself. Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or amusement. "Lucy," he said again, as if testing the name on his tongue. He gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit. You have eaten today?" "Enough." I sat because I didn't have a choice, spine straight, hands in my lap. The food smelled rich roasted meat, spiced vegetables, fresh bread, but my stomach was a tight knot. He waited until my plate was filled before speaking again. "Tell me about Holliford." Of all the things I expected, that was not one of them. "Why?" I asked. "Because it is your home," he said simply. "And I know the weight of losing such a thing." I should have softened at that. Instead, the words scraped something raw. "Do you?" I lifted my chin. "Did someone drag you from your village in chains and dress it up as an honor?" His jaw tightened. "My path to this throne was not gentle. And yet here you are, sitting on it," I said. "Giving orders, taking offerings. Is that what you think you are?" His gaze sharpened. "An offering? What else would you call it?" My voice came out too loud, bouncing off the stone. "You needed an omega." The moon pointed at me. "No one asked whether I wanted to be your solution." Silence stretched between us, taut as a bowstring. The candles hissed softly. At last, he said, "You are not a thing, Lucy." "Then stop treating me like one," I shot back. I expected anger. A growl. A reminder of his power. What I got was a slow exhale, as if he were trying very hard not to let something sharp slip free. "You are under my protection," he said. "The court will push. They will prod and test you. If you speak to them as you speak to me, they will use it against you." "Maybe I don't care," I said, even though we both knew I did. "Maybe I'm too tired to be grateful for a prison just because the bars are made of gold." His eyes darkened, not with rage, but with something heavier. Regret, maybe. I didn't know the king well enough to be sure. "You are right," he said quietly. "You did not choose this. Neither of us did. But we are bound to it now." His gaze dropped briefly to my mouth, then away, so fast I might have imagined it. "Eat, Lucy. You'll need strength." "For what?" I asked. "For surviving this place," he said. "For surviving me." We finished the meal in brittle silence. Every so often, his knee brushed mine under the table, and the bond sparked like static. Each time, he moved away first. Later, back in the tower chamber, I found him already there. Not inside, but in his own room, beyond the shared wall, the connection between the spaces as thin as a heartbeat. The moon hung outside the balcony, like an unblinking eye. I sat on the edge of the bed, my new dress pooling around my ankles, listening. Metal clinked softly as he moved. A minute later, there was a faint thud, as if he had sat heavily on something. I realized I was holding my breath. The mattress dipped. I whipped around, pulse-kicking, but the other half of the bed was empty. Only then did I see it. The faint outline of a headboard beyond the shared wall. The shadows of another bed mirroring mine on the other side. He was close. Closer than was reasonable or safe. I slid under the furs, more to hide from the thoughts clawing at me than from the cold. The blanket smelled faintly of smoke and pine. And him. Through the wall, his voice came again, low and rough with something that might have been exhaustion. "Pleasant dreams, Lucy." I stared into the darkness, my heart pounding loud enough to drown the crackle of the fire. I imagined him lying there, fully armored still, refusing comfort in a room built for it, refusing me. I should have been relieved. Instead, the bond tugged, insistent as a question. I turned onto my side, away from the wall, and pressed my eyes shut. I would not answer it. I would not beg. Not tonight. They called it instruction, but it felt a lot like reshaping. The morning after our first shared meal, a woman in dark gray appeared at my door with the precision of a blade laid on a whetstone. She bowed only as much as courtesy demanded, and introduced herself as Lady Saren, advisor to queens who had never lived long enough to grow old. "I have been charged with your education," she said, stepping into the room as if it already belonged to her. "We will begin with the court you must survive." Behind her stood a healer with soft eyes and ink-stained fingers, a woman named Alara. She carried a stack of leather-bound books and a satchel that smelled of herbs and clean linen. "Sit," Saren said, pointing to a chair by the fire. "A queen does not hover at doorways like a nervous servant." "I am not a queen," I muttered, but I sat anyway. "Not yet." Her gaze slid over my posture, my hands, the set of my shoulders. "But everyone will treat you as if you are. Their expectations will kill you faster than their knives if you're not prepared." Alara set the books on the table with a soft thump. "And their expectations," she added gently, "will be shaped by what you are." "Omega," I said, the word tasting like iron. "Omega," she agreed. "It is not a curse, Lucy. It is a bond, a pattern. Power of a different sort," Saren snorted. "Spoken like a healer, power is what you make of it, not what the moon hands you." She tapped the top book. "House sigils, names, alliances, grudges. You will learn them." I opened the cover. Lines and symbols stared back at me. Wolves and stags, mountains and rivers, all stitched together by ink and old feuds. My head spun just looking at them. "And this?" I frowned at the second book, its pages edged in silver. Alara rested a hand on it. "The history of Alpha-Omega bonds in the North. What happens when they are honored, and when they are not." I didn't want to know, but I needed to. So I listened. I learned that an Alpha's command could feel like a hand on your spine, turning your head, bending your knees unless he chose to soften it. I learned that an Omega's plea could drag an Alpha to his knees just as surely, if she dared to use it. I learned that the bond humming under my skin wasn't just longing. It was a living tether, hungry for alignment. "You will feel him," Alara said quietly, watching my expression. "His moods. His pain, if it's bad enough. The bond is a bridge. You may walk it. He may as well." "I never invited him into my head," I said. "No," Saren replied. "But you are here now, and pretending the bridge does not exist will only make you easier to push off it." Days blurred into a rhythm. Lessons with Saren on which Noble smiled while sharpening poison, which Lord loathed being contradicted, which lady collected secrets like jewels. Evenings with Alara, who explained how to ground myself when the bond flared, how to breathe through the pull until I could think again. And then there were the councils. Michael sent for me on the fourth morning. A guard escorted me to a long chamber lined with maps and grim-faced men and women. Michael sat at the head of the table, crown in place, expression hewn from stone. No one looked surprised to see me, but several sets of eyes narrowed as I took the empty chair along the wall. "You will observe," he murmured as I passed him, low enough that only I could hear. "Nothing more." His fingers brushed the back of my hand in the barest of acknowledgments, a touch so light it might have been an accident. The bond sparked anyway, so I watched. I watched him hear petitions from lords whose lands had been raided, from farmers who needed grain moved before the snows. I watched him question numbers, names, routes, until the stories either held or crumbled. His decisions came swift and precise. "Send 2 patrols there, triple the tithe here. Have this complaint investigated quietly because it smelled wrong." He was terrifying in his certainty. But he was fair. When a noble suggested burning a village suspected of harboring rogues, Michael's gaze turned ice cold. "We do not slaughter our own to chase shadows," he said. "Find proof, not smoke, or I will assume the only threat to my people is your judgment." No one argued. By the time the council ended, my mind whirled. This was not a man swinging power blindly. Every move fit into some larger pattern I could only half see. It unsettled me that part of me admired it. In the afternoons, he sent me to the training yard. I thought it was another lesson in humiliation at first, a court amusement to see the small village Omega flail with a sword. Then he dismissed the onlookers with a single look and stepped into the dust himself, tossing a wooden blade my way. "Catch," he said. I did not. It hit my palms and clattered to the ground. His mouth twitched. Again. The second time, I caught it. Barely. I curled my fingers around the hilt, feeling foolish. "You have a dozen warriors who would gladly snap my neck if I breathed wrong," I said. "Why do I need this?" He circled me, slow and careful, as he had in the throne room. Only this time there was no audience, no crown, just the crunch of gravel and the burn of his attention. "Because fear makes people brave in stupid ways," he said. "Because an Omega is a prize and a target, and I am not arrogant enough to believe my guards can stop every hand before it reaches you. He stepped closer, positioning himself behind me, his hands hovering just above my own on the hilt. Lift your arms. Like this. Heat rolled off him, seeping through the space between our bodies. I stiffened, but the bond unfurled in a slow, dangerous arc. Recognizing its source. You said you wouldn't touch me, I whispered. He didn't move closer. His breath brushed my ear. Nothing else. I am not touching you, he said. If that changes, you will know. Now here. His voice lowered. If someone corners you, aim for the soft places. The throat, the inside of the knee, the ribs, just under here. His hand ghosted through the air, indicating the points on his own body, never quite meeting mine. An alpha king teaching his omega exactly where to hurt him if she ever needed to. It did something strange to my chest. We practiced until my arms shook and sweat dampened my hairline. I landed a clumsy strike against the padded dummy, and a startled laugh burst from me, breathless and unguarded. The sound hung between us. I bit it back, suddenly wary. When I looked up, Michael was staring. Not at the sword, not at my stance. At me. The hardness in his eyes had softened, just for a heartbeat, into something almost wondering, like he'd stumbled across a wild creature in his own halls and didn't want to frighten it away. Again, he said, but his voice was rougher. I told myself I was imagining it. Small moments like that made my anger harder to hold. The evening I forgot my cloak in the council chamber. The wind knifed through the corridor, sinking its teeth into every bit of exposed skin. I wrapped my arms around myself, hunching against the cold, footsteps echoing sharp and lonely. Something heavy settled around my shoulders. Warmth rushed in, carrying smoke and pine and him. I stopped. His cloak weighed more than it looked, lined with fur, still carrying his body heat. I turned to find him behind me, bareheaded, the chill reddening his cheeks. You'll freeze before you reach the tower, he said. You need this more than I do, I protested, even as my fingers clutched the edge. Kings are supposed to look impressive, remember? Hard to do that if you're blue. For a second, I thought I'd pushed too far. Then he huffed a low sound that might have been a laugh, the corners of his mouth tilting. I will manage, he said. Take it. I opened my mouth to argue, then shut it. Pride had kept me alive this long. Tonight it could keep me warm, too. Thank you, I muttered. You're welcome, Lucy. The way he said my name did dangerous things to the bond. I walked faster, pretending not to feel it. Nights were the worst. At some point, he had ordered the wall between our rooms opened. Not entirely a wide archway now linked the spaces. A heavy curtain all that separated his sleeping chamber from mine. It wasn't closed when I went to bed, but he always drew it before he undressed, the soft slide of fabric a line he refused to cross. We lay in twin pools of firelight, close enough that I could hear him breathe. Sometimes his hand would fall against the edge of the mattress, just a shadow through the curtain from where mine rested. Once, our fingers brushed on the way to adjusting blankets. The bond flared so sharply I gasped. Sorry, he murmured through the fabric. It's fine, I lied, dragging my hand back as if burned. Every accidental touch sounded louder than shouting. Every inch of space he left between us felt like its own kind of intimacy. A promise he would not take what I did not give. A challenge that he believed utterly, that one day I might. I stared at the dark ceiling, listening to his heartbeat through stone and cloth and air, and repeated my private vow into the quiet. I would not beg. Not for warmth. Not for comfort. Not for him. The court learned my name far quicker than I learned theirs. Word spread that the Alpha King's Omega had crawled out of some dirt-smudged village, and suddenly everyone wanted a look. They came wrapped in velvet and jewels, their smiles smooth as oil, circling me in corridors and galleries the way wolves circled something they weren't sure was worth eating yet. You wear blue well, my lady, one duchess cooed, eyes sliding over the simple gown Saren had chosen for me. It hides how ordinary your coloring is. Very clever. Such a charming accent. Another sighed. You must never lose it, even if the court struggles to understand you. It's so rustic. Offers of help came too. They dripped from tongues like honey over poisoned bread. If you ever feel overwhelmed, come to me, a sharp-nosed lord said. The king, he can be intense. I hear some Omegas find his presence difficult to bear. His gaze flicked over my throat, where the bond thrummed faintly beneath the skin. You must be very brave to endure such distance. He left before I could decide whether to shove him into the nearest brazier. They never insulted Michael directly. They didn't need to. Every carefully crafted slight to me was a blade they hoped would slide under his armor. I might have drowned in it if not for the general. I met him in the practice yard on a day when the wind knifed through my cloak, and fear had sunk its teeth into the soft meat behind my ribs. Michael had been called away to deal with a border skirmish, leaving the court restless and me exposed. The man waiting by the fence looked carved from the same stone as the mountain. His hair had once been as dark as Michael's. Now silver threaded it thickly at the temples. He wore no crown, no jewels, only worn leather and the kind of calm that comes from seeing too much. "You're staring," I said, fingers tightening around the wooden blade I'd been pretending to practice with. "If I wished to stare Omega, you would not catch me at it." His mouth twitched. "I am only looking. Feels the same from this side," I muttered. He huffed a soft sound that might have been a laugh. "I'm Corin," he said, "General of the King's armies. We've met, but you were busy glaring at my liege over your chains." "That was a busy day," I said dryly. "It will not get less busy." His gaze sharpened. "Walk with me." We paced the perimeter of the yard, boots crunching over old frost. He kept his hands clasped behind his back, more deferential than he needed to be. "You know why they come to you," he said. "Because I'm new and interesting?" I guessed. "Like a strange bird someone dragged into their hall? Because you are his weakness." He didn't soften it. "Or they hope you will be." Heat climbed my neck. "He is the Alpha King," I snapped. "He does not have weaknesses." Corin's eyes crinkled at the corners. "He has many. He hides them well. I should know. I've spent my life watching his back." His gaze slid to me. "They will test you to see how deep the bond runs. If they can wound you, they can make him bleed." "I never asked to be anyone's weapon," I said. "No one ever does." His tone gentled. "But you're here. My advice? Choose which blows you let land. Not every insult deserves your blood." "Easy for you to say," I muttered. "No one is calling you rustic to your face." He chuckled. "Oh, they tried. Once." His smile faded. "Listen to Saren, trust Ilara, question everyone else, including me. And the king?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. He looked at me for a long, assessing moment. "Especially the king," he said softly. "And don't let him scare you out of seeing when he is not the monster he pretends to be." He left me with that and a dozen new questions. They multiplied at the next formal gathering. The great hall glittered with candlelight and ambition. Nobles clustered in little knots, their laughter bright and sharp. Music floated from the gallery, something elegant and restrained that made my feet itch for dances I actually knew. The air smelled of wine and roasted meat, and too many perfumes fighting for dominance. Michael stood at the top of the steps, speaking quietly with Corin and a scribe. His crown caught the light, metal and menace both. I felt him before I saw him, the bond uncoiling like a lazy cat at the back of my mind. As soon as I entered, heads turned. Conversations faltered, then resumed in hushed tones. "Walk," Saren murmured at my elbow. "Head high. You belong here whether they like it or not." I tried. Gods, I tried. I made it halfway across the hall before a man in dark red stepped into my path. His hair was pale, his smile polite, his eyes bright with the kind of curiosity that had nothing to do with kindness. "Your Majesty's Omega," he said, bowing just deeply enough to be technically respectful. "An honor, at last." "Lucy," I said, "of Hollowford." I'd learned that much. Never let them erase where you came from unless you chose to. "Of course." He let the name roll around his tongue like it amused him. "I am Lord Dane of the Eastern Marches. I must say, the rumors do you no justice." My spine prickled. "What rumors?" He lifted his brows in mock surprise. "Why, that the bond is unsettled, that our fearsome king keeps his Omega in a tower like a treasured relic, untouched, untasted." His gaze dropped, blatant, to my throat, then lower. "Some suggest it means his strength is waning." A hush rippled outward, subtle as a tide. People were listening. Of course they were. I swallowed the instinctive flinch. "I didn't realize your marches had so little to occupy them," I said. Should I be honored my personal life provides such entertainment? Dane laughed softly. Forgive me. In the East, we take pride in displaying what is ours. A bond that is not consummated can appear fragile. He tilted his head, mock concern painted on his face. We would not want anyone thinking our king cannot. His words cut off. A hand slid into mine, warm and unyielding. Michael stood at my side, so close his shoulder brushed mine. I hadn't heard him approach. His presence rolled over the hall, a silent growl that made lesser men straighten or shrink. Lord Dane, he said. The temperature of the room dropped a few degrees. Is my Omega's status a matter of border security now? Has the East grown so peaceful you must invent wars to fight? Color drained from Dane's face. Your Majesty, I meant no. Michael's jaw ticked once. His fingers tightened around mine for a heartbeat, then loosened, our hands still threaded together. His pulse raced against my skin, belying the calm in his voice. Careful, he said softly. The next time you question my strength, you'd best be holding a sword. I prefer my challenges honest. Dane bowed, the movement stiff, and retreated. The hall exhaled as if it had been holding its breath. I looked up at Michael. You didn't have to. Yes, he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the room. I did. We stayed like that for a while, his hand wrapped around mine, my fingers caught between his knuckles and the ridged scars on his palm. No one dared approach us. The bond hummed, pleased and unsettled all at once, like a wolf finally allowed near something it had only watched from afar. Later, when the hall had emptied and the candles burned low, he walked me back to the tower. We were almost at the curtain between our rooms when I spoke. You could have ended the whispers tonight, I said, my voice coming out smaller than I liked. You could have kissed me in front of them all, dragged me off like some storybook brute. That's what they expected, isn't it? He stopped halfway through drawing the curtain. Firelight painted one side of his face, shadow the other. That is what they wanted, he said. A spectacle. Proof that you are mine and nothing else. Aren't I? I asked. The words tasted bitter. His eyes found mine, and whatever leash he usually kept on, his emotions slipped for a heartbeat. Need burned there. Sudden and raw. So sharp I sucked in a breath. Yes, he said, and no. His throat worked. I want you. The bond pulls. Every night I leave this room, it feels like cutting my own throat, walking away from something my bones say I have already claimed. His hand lifted, as if he meant to touch my cheek, then curled into a fist halfway. But I will not have you because they demand it, or because the moon says so. My heart hammered, loud as war drums. Then why? Because you do not want me. His mouth twisted. Not yet. And I have taken enough in this life without consent. Silence wrapped around us. The curtain hung loose in his grip, soft fabric poised between open and closed. You could order me, I said, throat dry. Use that alpha command. I've read enough history to know how often that's done. I could, he agreed, his jaw clenched. I won't. Why? The words scraped on the way out. You risk looking weak, Lord Dane. Lord Dane is a fool sniffing at the edges of a cliff, he snapped, then forced himself to breathe. Let them think what they like. Let them whisper. I would rather bleed from 1,000 cuts to my reputation than win you that way. His gaze dropped to my mouth, then lower, then back to my eyes with visible effort. When I touch you, Lucy, it will be because you pulled me closer, not because I dragged you down. Heat flared low in my belly, treacherous and bright. The bond surged, a wave that left me dizzy. I wrapped my arms around myself so he couldn't see my hands shaking. You assume I ever will, I said. His smile was small and sad and full of something that felt a lot like hope. I assume nothing, he said. I only... Wait. He let the curtain fall between us, the fabric whispering shut. On my side, I pressed my palm to it, feeling the faint echo of his heat. On the other, I heard the soft thud as he sat on his bed, the quiet curse he breathed into the dark. Every almost touch between us roared in the silence. I lay awake a long time, staring at the ceiling, the memory of his hand in mine burning like a brand. I still swore I would never beg, but for the first time, the promise didn't feel like armor. It felt like a question. His private solar was nothing like the throne room. No banners, no wolves carved into stone. no nobles watching every flicker of his expression. Just four walls, shelves crowded with books and rolled maps, a table scarred by the weight of too many elbows, and a fire that snapped quietly in the grate. Outside the windows, the mountains had gone dark, the sky a deep indigo pricked with cold stars. He stood at the table when I entered, hair unbound for once, dark waves falling past his shoulders. The crown sat on the sill beside him, a simple ring of silver looking oddly small without his head beneath it. He wore only a dark shirt and worn leather trousers, sleeves pushed up to his forearms, no armor, no visible weapons, though I doubted he was ever truly unarmed. "Lucy," he said, like he'd been expecting me. "Your messenger said you required my presence," I answered, hovering near the door. I assumed that meant some new lesson on not embarrassing you in front of people who want me dead. The corner of his mouth lifted, tired but genuine. "If that were the case, I'd have invited Saren." "Sit." He nodded to the chair opposite his. "I want to show you something." Curiosity tugged me forward. The map on the table was larger than any I'd seen, the parchment old but carefully mended, edges weighted with small stones. Rivers and mountains spiderwebbed across it in ink, dotted with sigils I recognized now after weeks of Saren's drills. House marks, battle sites, borders that weren't nearly as solid as the lines suggested. "This is the Reach," he said, bracing his hands on either side of the map. "My kingdom. Yours now, in the eyes of the court." "I didn't marry a kingdom," I said. "Just a man." His gaze flicked to me, something unreadable passing through it. "The two are not so easily separated," he murmured. "Here." He tapped a point near the southern edge. "Holliford." The inked dot looked so small I had to lean in to see it. One village among hundreds, a smudge on parchment that meant everything to me and almost nothing to the rest of the world. "It's tiny," I said, throat tight. "So is a wolf pup," he replied, "until it bites." I huffed a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "You really don't know how not to sound like a threat, do you?" Occupational hazard. His fingers moved, tracing the line of a river northward. "My first battle was here." I followed the motion, recognizing the sigil for House Vero from Saren's charts. "You were... how old?" 17, he said. "Old enough to think I knew everything. Young enough to be wrong." He didn't look at me as he spoke. His gaze stayed on the map, but his voice had gone rough, the words scraping their way out. "My father sent me with 100 men to put down a border rebellion. A test, he called it, to see if his heir could command." His jaw flexed. "I thought they would see my banner and surrender. That's how it had always worked for him. That's not what happened, I guessed." "No." His mouth twisted. "They saw a boy with a heavy name and decided to see how hard they could make him bleed." I listened, quiet. There was no triumph in the story, no swagger, just facts laid out like pieces on a board. "We won," he continued. "In the end, but I lost a third of my men, including my brother." He touched another mark on the map. Not a village, not a house, just a tiny X near the river's bend. I swallowed. "I didn't know you had a brother." "Had," he corrected softly. "Rian, younger. Laughed too loud, trusted people too easily." His eyes went distant. "He took an arrow meant for me, died before I could even get the shaft out." A beat of silence. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. "I'm sorry," I said, because anything else felt useless. "So am I." He finally looked up. "For a long time I thought if I'd been a better alpha, I could have saved him. I still think that, some nights." "You were 17, I said. "You shouldn't have had to save anyone. Kings don't get to choose when they start being responsible," he said. "They just are, or people die." His eyes held mine, the weight of that truth hanging between us. For once, I didn't look away. "My mother died in the spring thaw," I found myself saying. The words surprised me as much as him. I hadn't planned to offer anything back. The river flooded, same as it always did. Only that year, the bridge went with it. She was on it. He straightened slightly. "You were how old?" 8. I traced the river line near Holliford, finger moving along the ink as if I could still feel the current. They told me it was quick, that she didn't have time to be afraid. I swallowed. I don't know if that was true, or if they just didn't want to see me break. "Who told you?" he asked. "Everyone," I said. No one. I let my hand fall away from the map. My father stopped talking about her altogether, as if pretending she'd never existed would hurt less. He watched me, expression softened by something that made my chest ache. Remembering is a different kind of pain, he said quietly, but forgetting is worse. You sound like you know, I said. I do. His gaze flicked to the little X by the river again. Rian would have liked you. I doubt that, I said, because the alternative that his lost brother might have sat in this room, might have teased him and softened him the way siblings do, was too much to carry. He didn't argue. We fell into a strange kind of quiet then. Not the brittle silence of our earlier days, but something looser. He poured wine for both of us without asking, his fingers steady but slow, as if every movement weighed more tonight. Without the armor, he looked, younger. Not young. Exactly the years and battles were carved too deep for that, but less like a statue and more like a man. His hair, freed from its braids, fell around his face in loose waves. The lines at the corners of his eyes seemed deeper in the firelight. You look tired, I said, before I could swallow the observation. One corner of his mouth lifted. You try ruling a kingdom and resisting a moon bond at the same time, he said. See how rested you feel. Heat climbed my neck. I took a swallow of wine that did nothing to cool it. That's your choice, I muttered. Is it? He asked. You think this is easy? He leaned on the table, closer, and the bond leapt like a struck chord. My pulse stumbled. I busied myself, tracing the border between two houses just so I didn't have to look at his mouth. His hand shifted, and my knuckles brushed against his. It was barely a touch. Skin on skin, the lightest graze. The bond roared. It wasn't a gentle tug this time. It surged through me in a hot, dizzy rush, dragging the air from my lungs. Images that weren't mine flickered behind my eyes, snow and blood, a wolf throwing back its head to howl, the taste of iron and wind and need. I gasped. Michael went utterly still. His gaze snapped to our hands. The knuckles that had brushed mine curled, as if his first instinct was to grab, to hold tight and never let go. He stopped himself halfway, fingers hovering. Lucy, he said, and my name sounded wrecked in his mouth. I stared at the place where our skin touched, at the slight tremor in his hand. Every inch of me buzzed, pulsing in time with the beat of his heart. He didn't move closer. Didn't yank me into his arms or slam my hand flat to the table. He just looked at me, eyes dark and wild and asking a question without words. Can I? That was what it felt like, the weight of his gaze. Not a demand, a plea. My better judgment screamed at me. This was the moment I'd been afraid of since the throne room. This was the line I'd sworn never to cross. But his hand was warm, his control shaking apart in front of me, and I suddenly understood how much it cost him every night to walk away. Slowly, heart hammering, I turned my hand, letting my fingers slip into his grasp. His breath left him in a rough exhale. His fingers closed around my wrist, calloused palm wrapping my pulse. He didn't pull me closer. He just held on, thumb resting against the frantic beat under my skin, as if confirming that I was real and alive and his. The bond settled into a fierce, steady thrum. My head spun. We stayed like that for a long, suspended moment. His eyes never left mine. The fire crackled. Maps rustled faintly in the draft, but all I could feel was the heat of his hand and the echo of his restraint. Then the fear caught up. Not of him. Of myself. I yanked my hand back as if his touch burned. I should go, I said, the words tumbling out too fast. It's late. His fingers tightened for a heartbeat, then opened, letting me slip free. Lucy, he began. Don't, my voice shook. Don't say anything you can't take back in the morning. The muscle in his jaw jumped. There is very little I say that I do not mean, he said. But I will keep my words. For now. I nodded, backing away like he was a cliff edge and I'd nearly stepped over. At the door, I looked back despite myself. He stood where I'd left him, hair loose, crown forgotten, hand still hanging in the air as if it remembered the shape of my wrist. He looked, not like a king or a monster, just like a man who'd almost gotten something he'd wanted for a very long time. That night, I dreamed of him for the first time. Not of the throne room, or his threats, or his power. I dreamed of his hand on my skin, of amber eyes watching me like I mattered more than the borders on that map. In the dream, I didn't pull away. I stepped closer. I touched the scar on his cheek, the one I'd only seen in firelight, and he leaned into my palm like it was the first kindness he'd known in years. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, sheets twisted around my legs, the bond humming low and satisfied. Anger flared, sharp and hot. Not at him, at myself. I threw off the blankets and crossed to the window, shoving it open so the cold could bite some sense into me. The mountains stared back, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere beyond them, Hollowford still existed, quiet and small. I will not beg, I whispered into the wind, as if it could carry the vow away before he felt it through the bond. The words sounded thin, even to me. For the first time, a crack had opened in the wall I'd built between us, and I was terrified of how much I already wanted to see what might happen if it broke. The first sign of trouble was the laughter, too loud, too sharp, rolling down the stone corridors long before the herald's voice reached the hall. By the time I stepped onto the balcony above the great doors, banners had already been changed, our wolf's head hanging beside another standard, black and gold, a stylized raven with its wings spread wide. Lord Aaron of the Western Cliffs, Saren murmured at my shoulder. He commands 3 coastal packs, half the trade routes, and more ego than sense. Smile, Omega. I did not smile. He entered like he owned the place. Some men wore their crowns on their heads. Aaron wore his in the way he moved, all flowing black leather and easy swagger. His hair was dark and loose, his eyes a pale gray that caught every detail and filed it away for later use. He bowed to Michael deep enough to be technically respectful, shallow enough to be an insult. Your Majesty, he said. It has been too long. Not long enough, Michael replied, which made Corin cough to hide a laugh. Introductions bled into formal greetings, then into the feast itself. The hall blazed with firelight and gossip. Musicians played, servants wove in and out with platters, nobles shifted their chairs a fraction closer to whichever power they hoped would notice them. I sat to Michael's right, as always. I felt Aaron's gaze scrape over me more than once, assessing, amused. Your Omega, he said eventually, raising his cup in my direction. A pleasure at last. The stories do not do you justice. Most stories don't, I answered, keeping my voice mild. Saren's hand brushed my elbow under the table in silent warning. His smile curved, too slow, like a blade unsheathed an inch at a time. And how are you finding life at court, little wolf? Our king can be austere. One wonders if the bond has warmed him at all. Michael's knife paused above his plate. Only for a heartbeat, but I felt the shift in him, the way his presence sharpened like teeth. I laid my hand on my own lap so I wouldn't do something stupid, like reach for him where everyone could see. I manage, I said. The walls are a bit taller than I'm used to, but the view is better. Aaron's eyes gleamed. So I hear. Though some say your tower is not the only thing untouched by the king. The hall went very still. He hadn't raised his voice, but the words carried. A hush rippled outward. Someone dropped a fork. It clattered against a plate like a bell. Michael set his knife down with slow care. Lord Aaron, he said, voice soft and dangerous. There are lines, even for old allies. I mean no offense. Aaron spread his hands, mock placating. But when a man binds an Omega and leaves her unmarked, people begin to speculate. They wonder if the bond is as strong as the treaties written in its name. If the king still has the appetite his title requires. Heat flooded my face, equal parts fury and humiliation. Every eye in the hall pressed against my skin. Careful, Corin murmured under his breath from further down the table. He's baiting you both. Michael's jaw clenched. For a heartbeat, I thought he would leap across the table and tear Aaron's throat out in front of everyone. Part of me wanted him to. A darker part wanted to see what would happen if he claimed me where they all could watch. Instead, he exhaled once, hard, and turned his head toward me. Walk with me, he said quietly. It wasn't a command. Not quite. I stood anyway, because staying seated felt too much like hiding. We left the hall under 100 watching eyes, the murmur swelling behind us as soon as the doors shut. The corridor outside was cooler, the sound of the feast muffled by stone. I drew a long breath, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. I'm sorry, I said. I should have. You did nothing wrong, Michael cut in. His strides were smooth and controlled, but the air around him felt charged, like a storm waiting for somewhere to land. He came here to measure my edges. He brought his own noose. He just hasn't realized it yet. Then why leave? I asked. Why not shut him up in front of everyone? Because ripping out the throat of a powerful lord at a feast tends to start wars, he said dryly. And despite what they whisper, I did not keep you untouched, just to use you as an excuse for bloodshed. We'd reached one of the open courtyards, a square of stone open to the sky, moonlight spilling down like spilled milk. Cold air rushed over my bare arms. I rubbed them, suddenly wishing I'd brought a cloak. Besides, he added, he's not done. I frowned. What do you mean? Your Majesty's Omega, a smooth voice drawled. Aaron stepped out from the shadow of an archway, alone now, no courtiers to buffer his presence. The moon painted his features in silver gray, the pleasure in his eyes darker than before. Forgive me, he said, not sounding sorry at all. I hoped for a word without so many ears. Michael shifted slightly, putting himself between us without quite blocking me from view. You have had more words than you deserve already, Aaron. Yes, temper. Aaron's gaze slid past him, landing on me like a hand. I meant what I said, you know. It must be frustrating to be bound to such a controlled alpha. All ice and duty. No heat. My stomach twisted. You presume much, I said. I observe much, he corrected. An Omega's eyes do not lie, nor does her scent. You smell of hunger restrained, of nights spent alone on a bed built for two. Michael's growl was a low, vibrating thing, barely leashed. Enough. Aaron ignored him. There are alphas who do not fear what they are, he went on, voice silk over steel, who do not leave their mate untouched for the sake of appearances. If your bond is so fragile he must coddle it, perhaps it would flourish better elsewhere. He stepped closer. Not close enough to touch me, but near enough that the bond flared, sensing another alpha's presence. It recoiled instinctively, reaching for Michael instead. I felt the tug, sharp and nervous. I am not a prize to pass around when you're bored, I said, keeping my voice steady. And my bond is none of your concern. On the contrary, Aaron's smile sharpened. The strength of the king's bond concerns everyone in this realm. If his Omega does not accept him, why should we? Michael moved. One moment he was beside me. The next he was in front of Aaron, a wall of muscle and fury between us. His hand fisted in the other man's collar, slamming him back against the stone. You forget yourself, he snarled, voice no longer calm. You speak of my Omega again as if she were a piece on your board, and I will show you exactly how much strength I have left. Aaron laughed, breathless but not repentant. There he is, he murmured. The beast everyone fears. Tell me, Michael, do you think they'd fear you more or less if they saw you rutting your little village girl in the Great Hall to prove a point? My vision went red at the edges. Shame burned through me, so hot it almost drowned out my terror. Michael's grip tightened. For a heartbeat, I saw the future. Blood on stone, a broken neck, a war. Michael, I said. He didn't look at me. Michael, I said again louder. Let him go. His shoulders rose and fell once, twice. Slowly, as if prying his fingers from something they desperately wanted to keep, he released Aaron and stepped back. You overstep, he said, voice dropping to a deadly quiet. But not tonight, not here. Aaron smoothed his collar, eyes bright. Of course, he said. No doubt your Omega will smooth you as well, if you ever let her close enough. He sauntered past us, heading back toward the hall as if we'd merely discussed the weather. I stood there shaking, trying to decide whether to be grateful or furious that Michael had not snapped his neck. This is what they will do, he said, still staring at the archway where Aaron had disappeared. Again and again. Push, prod, look for cracks. I swallowed. And if they find one? His gaze finally shifted to me. Then we make sure they cut their own hands on it. We returned to the feast together. The hall quieted as soon as we appeared, every conversation bending gently toward us. Aaron had reclaimed his seat and was speaking too casually to a nearby lord, an excellent imitation of a man who had not just taunted a king and survived. Michael did not release my hand when we took our places. If anything, his grip tightened. Continue, he said to the hall at large, voice deceptively mild. We were enjoying ourselves, were we not? Music resumed. Talk rose, cautious at first, then bolder as the wine flowed. I could feel eyes on us like pricks of heat along my skin. Halfway through the next course, Heir stood. "Your Majesty," he said, loud enough that every head turned. "Forgive one more question from a concerned ally." Michael's thumb stroked once over my knuckles, a tiny, grounding touch. "Choose your next words carefully," he said. Heir smiled. "I only wonder, for the sake of stability, of course, why your Omega still looks so very untouched. Do you fear hurting her? Or is it that the bond refused you?" Gasps whispered through the hall. My heart slammed against my ribs. This was it. The moment he wanted Michael forced to choose between his promise to me and his need to show strength. Claim me before everyone, or be called weak. He stood. The air changed. Even the torches seemed to lean in. I braced myself for rough hands, for a mouth on mine, for the bond to snap tight under the force of an alpha's command. Part of me recoiled. A very small, traitorous part leaned forward. Instead, Michael turned to face me fully, and knelt. The great Michael of the North, Alpha King, terror of a dozen battlefields, dropped to one knee on the rush-covered stone. The hall reeled. I heard someone choke on wine. Corin swore under his breath. Michael's hand, the one still wrapped around mine, shook. "Lucy of Holliford," he said, voice raw. "Omega, queen in all but name." "Michael," I whispered, throat closing. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, there was no barrier between us. No armor, no crown. Only a man whose control had been flayed open for everyone to see. "They question my strength," he said. "Let them. They question our bond." His mouth twisted. "I cannot blame them. I have not given them the proof they expect. Because every night I walk away from you, it feels like tearing out my own heart." His fingers tightened around mine. "I burn, Lucy. I have been burning since the night they dragged you into my hall, and the only thing keeping me from turning to ash is the promise I made to wait until you wanted me." The hall was so quiet I could hear my own pulse. "If that makes me weak," he went on, louder now, gaze flicking briefly to Heir, "then let the realm call me weak. Let them whisper that I am soft, that I have been tamed by a girl from a village the map barely remembers. I will take every insult." His eyes found mine again. "Just don't leave me." The words hit me harder than any order could have. He wasn't claiming me. He was begging. "And if I never want you?" I asked, voice shaking. I didn't know why I threw that lifeline to my pride. Maybe I needed to hear his answer as much as the court did. His jaw flexed. "Then I will die wanting," he said simply. "But I will not take what you do not give." Heir shifted, clearly not expecting this. The game he'd come to play had changed rules while he watched. I looked down at the man on his knees before me, the Alpha King, my supposed captor, the one everyone feared and felt. The crack in my walls widened into something dangerously close to a doorway. The bond thrummed, fierce and hopeful, waiting to see what I would do. I did not tug him to his feet. I did not lean down and kiss him senseless, though the urge pulsed through me like another heartbeat. I bent just enough to lay my free hand over his shoulder, fingers curling in the fabric of his tunic to steady us both. "I'm not leaving," I said quietly. For now, it was the only promise I could make. His eyes closed for a heartbeat, relief shuddering through him. When he opened them again, the beast was still there, but so was something softer, something that belonged only to me. He rose then, not dragging me, not displaying me, just standing at my side, our hands still joined, facing the hall together. Let them whisper, I thought, lifting my chin. Tonight, if they wanted a spectacle, they'd have to choke on the sight of a king on his knees for his Omega, and an Omega who wasn't sure how much longer she could pretend she didn't want to kneel for him in return. For a long, breathless moment, no one in the hall moved. The King of the North was on his knees in front of me, his hand wrapped around mine, his vow hanging in the air like smoke. I could feel the court holding its collective breath, feel the power tilting, all those sharp-eyed nobles scrambling in their heads to understand what this meant for their games. They thought he'd made himself smaller. Only now, looking down at him, did I understand what he'd actually done. He'd already surrendered everything that mattered to men like him. Pride, carefully built over a lifetime of battlefield victories. The image of unshakable control that had terrified the realm into obedience. the illusion that nothing reached him, nothing cut deep. He'd put it all on the floor at my feet and called it nothing compared to the promise he'd made me. It hit me, all at once, how much he'd been holding back. Every time he'd stepped away from me at night, knuckles white on his own self-control. Every lesson where he'd let my anger bite into him and never used his power to bite back. Every careful, measured, almost touch that could have so easily become more if he'd stopped caring whether he hurt me. He'd been the one bleeding for this, quietly, where no one could see. Something in my chest cracked wide open. Aaron was watching, eyes bright with calculation, waiting for me to flinch, to pull away, to prove that the king's weakness was real. The rest of the court watched too, jaws clenched, fans forgotten in mid-flutter, goblets hovering halfway to mouths. If I walked away now, I wouldn't just be saving myself. I'd be putting the blade in Aaron's hand. I lifted my free hand and cupped Michael's face. His breath caught. The hall seemed to tilt. Up close like this, without the distance I'd always kept between us, I could see the shadows under his eyes, the faint silver threads at his temples, the tension carved into the set of his mouth, the beast everyone feared, and beneath it, the boy who'd lost a brother by a river and never forgiven himself. "Look at me," I said. He did. Of course he did. Amber eyes locking on mine, raw and open. "This king," I said, and I made sure my voice carried, calm and clear, "is mine." A ripple went through the hall. Shock and something else, relief, in some faces, dismay, in others. I turned my head, just enough to catch Aaron's gaze. "You came here to see cracks," I went on. "You wanted to know if he'd choose his pride or his promise." I let my thumb brush the line of Michael's jaw, feeling the faint rasp of stubble under my skin. "Now you know." He chose me. Aaron's smile had gone thin. "And do you choose him?" he asked softly. "Omega?" It was a fair question, the only one that mattered. I swallowed, the weight of 100 eyes pressing against my skin. Fear curled in my stomach, familiar and sharp. Fear of losing myself. Fear of wanting too much. Fear of being wrong. I looked back at Michael. He hadn't tried to stand, hadn't tried to drag me into some grand, possessive display. He just knelt there, letting the entire court see him stripped of every shield he'd ever worn, trusting me to decide what happened next. "Yes," I said. The word left me like a breath I'd been holding since the night I'd arrived at this fortress. "Yes," I repeated, louder. "I choose him. If this court needs proof of our bond, they will have it. But on our terms. Not as a spectacle for your entertainment, not as a weapon for your politics." Michael's fingers trembled around mine. Aaron's eyes narrowed, weighing this new shape of the game. "Careful, little wolf," he said, but his tone had changed, less mocking, more wary. "When you stand beside a king, everyone will aim for your heart." I smiled, sharp and small. "Then they'd better learn how to miss." There was nothing more to say. I squeezed Michael's hand. "Stand up," I murmured, "before Corin has an apoplexy from watching you kneel this long." One corner of his mouth twitched, even through the tension. He rose, fluid and controlled, still holding my hand in his. Together, we turned back to the hall. "Enjoy the rest of the evening," he said, voice once more iron-wrapped velvet. "There will be no further questions about the strength of our bond." No one argued. Later, when the doors closed behind the last courtier and the echoes of music faded into the stone, he led me back to his chamber in silence. The guards along the corridor pretended not to notice that our hands remained joined. Inside, the room felt different. It was the same space I'd walked through 100 times, fire crackling in the hearth, maps on the table, the wide bed I'd never crossed. But the air was thicker now, charged with everything that had been said and everything left unsaid. He let my hand go at the threshold, as if it hurt him to do it. "Lucy," he began, voice rough. "If I know what you did," I cut in. "In there." His jaw flexed. "I made a statement," he said. "To protect you. To protect the realm. It was necessary." "That's not what I mean." I took a step closer. My heart hammered so loud I was sure he could hear it. "You gave them your throat, Michael. In front of everyone. You let them see you beg. For you," he said simply. "They needed to understand where my line is." "Your line," I echoed. "Or mine." His eyes softened. something aching and fierce in them. They're the same now, whether you want them to be or not. I stood there, shaking, feeling every pull of the bond like a tide against my bones. For so long I'd treated that pull like an enemy, something to fight, to fear. Now, looking at him, I realized it had been trying to drag us to the same shore the whole time. "I don't want to be taken," I said. His brows drew together, pain flashing across his face. "I know. That's why I'm not finished." I swallowed. "I don't want to be taken. Not by the moon, not by the court, not even by you. I want to be chosen." My voice broke on the last word, and I want to choose back. The silence that followed was alive. His throat worked. "Lucy," he said, my name a scrape of sound. "You owe me nothing." "I know." I took another step, close enough now to see the tiny flecks of gold in his irises. "But I owe myself the truth." My hand lifted of its own accord, fingers trembling as I touched the scar beneath his cheekbone, the one I'd dreamed of. His eyes fluttered shut, breath-catching, as if that tiny contact hurt and healed in the same instant. "I want you," I whispered, saying it felt like stepping off a cliff. "And that terrifies me, because if you break me, there won't be anything left to crawl away with." His eyes flew open, blazing. "I would rather die than break you." "Then prove it," I said. My heart felt like it might tear free of my ribs. "I'm asking, Michael. The word lodged in my throat. Pride bucked, the last, stubborn piece of the wall still standing. I forced it down. "I'm begging you. Touch me." Something shattered in his expression. Not control, he held on to that with white-knuckled precision, but the last of his doubt. He lifted his hands slowly, like a man approaching a skittish animal. One settled at my waist, warm and solid. The other cupped the back of my neck, fingers sliding into my hair. The bond surged. Not a harsh yank this time, but a flood of warmth that made my knees go weak. "Tell me if it's too much," he murmured. "Tell me to stop, and I will. No matter what it costs." I nodded, unable to speak. Then I leaned in, closing the last sliver of distance, and pressed my mouth to his. The first kiss was almost gentle, as if he still didn't quite believe he was allowed to have it. His lips moved against mine with aching care, giving me every chance to pull back. When I didn't, when I instead fisted my hands in his shirt and tugged him closer, something inside him finally snapped. He deepened the kiss, a low sound escaping him, half groan, half prayer. His hands framed my face now, thumbs brushing my cheekbones like I was something precious. The world narrowed to heat and breath, and the soft rasp of his stubble against my skin. When we broke apart, we were both shaking. "You're sure," he said, foreheads resting together. "Lucy, if we cross this line, it will not disappear in the morning. You will feel me in every part of you. The bond will—" "I know what the bond will do," I whispered. Alara's lessons, the books, the stories, all of it flickered through my mind. A shared life, shared strength, shared pain. I want it. I want you. Not because the moon says so. Because I do. I took his hands and guided them. One to my racing heart, the other to the curve of my hip. "Please," I breathed. "Michael, touch me." The word rang between us like a bell. Beg. I had sworn I would never do it. Never give anyone that power over me again. But here, now, with him shaking as hard as I was from holding back, begging didn't feel like surrender to a captor. It felt like opening a door we'd both been trapped behind. He exhaled, a sound full of reverence and relief and something that might have been love. His hands began to move slow, careful, worshipful, mapping the lines of my body like he meant to memorize them. His mouth found mine again, then my jaw, then the hollow of my throat. Each touch a question I answered by pulling him closer. Our bond flared, bright and fierce, wrapping around us like a promise instead of a chain. Under the watchful silence of the mountain and the indifferent gaze of the moon, I let the Alpha King lay me down, not as his offering, not as his prisoner, but as the woman who had finally, willingly, begged for him. And he answered that plea with every whispered vow that this joining, this fire, this fragile, terrifying happiness would never again be a cage I hadn't built with him, brick by deliberate brick, from both sides. By the time the snow began to melt from the tower roofs, Lord Aaron was gone. No songs were sung about his departure. There was no dramatic exile, no head on a spike over the gate. Just a string of quiet decisions, trade routes shifted, alliances reinforced, a few key loyalties purchased or reclaimed that left him with nowhere to dig his claws in. One morning his banner was taken down from the guest wing, and no one bothered to ask when he'd return. With the memory of Michael on his knees still hanging over the court like a ghost, no one was eager to test a bond that strong again. I stood beside Michael in council after that, not behind him. Saren stopped correcting where I placed my hands and started asking my opinion before sessions. When lords from the far villages complained about taxes, I remembered what it felt like to count every coin for bread and firewood and convinced Michael to stagger the payments with the harvests. When someone suggested burning an entire hamlet to root out bandits, I saw the way Michael's jaw clenched, the way the old grief flickered in his eyes, and stepped in. "Punish the guilty," I said. "Protect the rest." He listened. The council did too. I watched the way their faces changed over weeks. At first, they looked at me like a curiosity the king had grown attached to, then a shield they could use or strip away. Eventually, some of them started looking at me like something else, a force in my own right. The Omega who could speak and be heard, who could lay a hand on the king's arm when his temper flared and feel the bond calm both of us. At night, there was no curtain between our rooms anymore. We shared one bed, one fire, one tangled mess of blankets. Sometimes we fell asleep mid-argument, my foot shoved against his knee, his arm draped over my waist like he'd claimed me in his dreams even if he'd lost the debate. Sometimes we lay awake, whispering half-formed plans and half-confessed fears into the dark. He liked to remind me I'd begged. I liked to remind him he'd knelt first. I seemed to remember a great hall full of nobles watching their king swear he'd die wanting, I would say, tracing the scar beneath his cheekbone. And I remember a certain Omega saying please, he'd murmur against my throat, his mouth curving, several times. Greedy, I'd accuse. For you, he'd answer, and I would stop pretending to argue. On the next full moon, we walked together to the courtyard where he'd first whispered his vow. No guards followed, no courtiers hovered. The torches burned low, more for habit than necessity. The moon was so bright she painted everything in silver and shadow. The stone where he'd pinned Aaron, where he'd almost lost himself, where he'd once forced the world to bend for his restraint, seemed quieter now. We stopped in the center. The bond hummed, a steady, familiar warmth between us instead of the wild, raw pull it had been. "Do you regret any of it?" I asked. "Which part?" he said. "Letting them see me on my knees, almost starting a war, taking an Omega who threatened to make me crawl in front of my court?" "All of it," I said, even though I already knew the answer. He studied the mountains for a moment, breath ghosting white in the cold air. "I regret many things," he said, "but not you, never you." I exhaled slowly, something in me settling. "Good," I said, "because if you ever break my heart, I'll make the entire kingdom watch their king crawl." He huffed a surprised laugh that turned into something softer. He stepped closer, pressing his forehead to mine, his hands warm on my hips. "Gladly," he murmured. "I'll crawl, beg, kneel, whatever you wish, as long as it keeps me here." "Dramatic," I said, but my fingers curled into his shirt, holding tight. "Alpha," he corrected. "We're built for drama." We stood there under the moon for a while, just breathing the same cold air, the same quiet. No chains, no audience. Just two souls who'd both tried to hold the line alone, and finally learned how to hold it together. When we turned back toward the fortress, his hand found mine automatically. I didn't pull away. We walked inside side by side, king and queen, alpha and omega, not captor and captive anymore. Just two stubborn, scarred creatures who had chosen, again and again, to beg for each other, instead of clinging to the lives they'd already lost. If you've stayed with us all the way to this moment, tell me, where are you watching from right now, and which scene in Michael and Lucy's story hit you the hardest?